Welcome to the latest episode of ProphetFM. I am Brandon Prophet, and I am joined today by Image and DC writer Mark Poulton. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Great, man. Actually, you were one of the first people I thought of as well when I realized that I didn't want to get just pigeonholed into doing wrestling podcasts. So I knew for sure that you were somebody I definitely wanted to try and get on. So I appreciate that you came out and did this for me.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
Great. So for those of you who aren't familiar with my comic writing exploits, I met Mark, probably maybe 7 years ago, probably, maybe even 8. Mark was
about right.
Oh, hold on. I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I said, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So what happened, I had written a book called The Dead Cell, and I had kind of tried to shop it around a little bit, and Mark was working with Arcana Comics. What was it you were doing with them at that time?
My official title was Vice President of Operations, and it pretty much just covered everything. I was a jack of all trades there. I handled submissions. I organized their convention schedule and set up, and did press releases, all sorts of marketing.
Oh, so you're kind of the jack of all trades over there, then, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Great. What do you think that experience kind of taught you about the comic business?
Oh, it definitely opened my eyes to a part of the industry that I wasn't aware of. Like, even when I tried to break into comics just as a writer, I had no clue what it really took to make it in the comic industry. So actually getting like inside experience and seeing what goes into like a publisher's planning for their year, for their publishing schedule, working with Diamond to make sure they get on their distribution schedule, stuff like that, as well as the marketing aspect. Because I think a lot of indie creators, when they're just starting out, they deliver their book and they feel like their job's done. But there's a whole another job to do, and that's getting the word out there for your book.
Sure. Well, let me now. After I kind of got on board with Arcana and we were working together. Shortly after, I had submitted all the final artwork and lettering and all that stuff. If I'm not mistaken, you kind of moved on from that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Around that time, my writing had taken off. I was writing Evangeline at Image. I had started working with Rob Liefeld on and off on some books, and then he relaunched Evangeline and tapped me to be the writer of it. And then he brought me on when he was doing a ton of books at DC. He brought me with him to work on Hawkman, and just juggling family life, writing career, and everything else was just too much. So something had to go. But I still keep in touch with Arcana, and I still I do some consulting work for them now.
Oh, excellent. Well, and I me and Frank kind of talked about this on last week's podcast. We both kind of had different experiences with Arcana, and I feel like I like Sean O'Reilly, the owner, I guess, of Arcana, is a great guy. I always kind of felt like he just had like so many irons in the fire that you couldn't really nail him down on anything. So I kind of feel like, as far as my experience with Arcana, you were kind of like the centering force of it.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I kind of see that. Sean does have a ton of things going on. Just managing that huge library of characters. He has an animation studio. He's a professor at a university. Yeah, all his kids, I think, are in the acting industry. So he has a lot going on. So I know he doesn't like you said, it's hard to pin him down.
Sure, yeah, just kind of stretches himself as thin as possible and just kind of goes for it, huh?
Yeah.
But there's a lot to be said about presses like Arcana, for instance. I pretty much had the freedom to do whatever I wanted. I don't think anybody really, tried to make any edits or suggestions as far as that goes. They were just kind of like, here's the ball, run with it.
Yeah, that's the good thing. Like when I would go through submissions, if there was someone who I felt, had the ability to take the ball and run with it, and could like do project management, that was great. That was one less thing off my plate that I had to do. Like the biggest thing I hated doing was being like a den mother, always checking up on people, making sure they were working on their book. I think that's one of the big things about like the comic industry. People either have the work ethic or they don't. So I try to look for those people that have it, that can get the work done on their own without me having to keep, poking them with a stick.
Well, let me ask you this, because I always kind of wondered this. Do you guys, so when you would get a submission, would you read the entire project or would you just read like a piece of it and then kind of go from there?
When the submission would come in, the first thing I would do is look at the art. If I wasn't feeling the art, usually I wouldn't even get to reading the synopsis, because it's a visual media. If the artwork's not working, it's a tough sell, I think. So if I liked the artwork, then I read the whole thing and made sure that it was something that Arcana would want to release.
Oh, excellent. Now, when you were working with Arcana too, you put out a book called Coney Waves, right? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep.
Coney Waves, yeah. Which was a really cool book. It was kind of correct me if I'm right. It's been a while since I've read it, but it was about a detective in Hawaii who kind of delved into like the mysteries of Hawaii, so to speak, right?
Yeah, definitely. It was. I always pitch it to people. It's Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Hawaii 5-0.
Oh, that's a perfect description too. Now I know that you had a spinoff book with that, and I didn't you wasn't that featured like kind of like as an Easter egg on Psych a few times?
Yeah, they had an episode that took place at a comic convention, and George Takei was like the guest star of the episode. But they hired Sean O'Reilly to create the Comic Con, so it was filled with a ton of Arcana books, and there was a huge Coney Waves booth, and there was Coney Waves posters throughout the episode. One of my friends always asked me, he asked me before and joked if that was me at the Coney Waves booth, and I was like, oh no, that was just some extra. And he was like, oh, that's awesome that they got an actor to play you in the show.
That's awesome. So when that was going on, like, how did Sean approach you about that at all, or did he just throw it in there?
Oh, he just it was funny. I found out about the very first time I went to San Diego Comic-Con. So it was summer 2006. I showed up at the Arcana booth, and I met Sean for the first time, and he was like, oh, guess what? Do you watch the show Psych? And I was like, oh, I love that show. And he was like, Coney Waves is going to be on it. I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, he told me about the scene. And he joked that he always said he stood behind the book, and he literally is standing behind the book. He's wearing a Coney Waves t-shirt in the episode.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I always kind of felt, and I know you're a wrestling fan too, so you might be with me on this. I always kind of felt Sean looked like Chris Jericho.
Oh yeah, definitely. I see that now that you mention it.
Sean, he's a funny guy, man. Like if you can actually talk to him, and like I said, it's really hard to get him to slow down and focus on anything. But if you do that, like he's a comical guy, I think.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Yeah. So I guess you mentioned earlier that you got hooked up with Rob Liefeld. So how did that come about?
I was a fanboy of Rob since since like the '90s. He was the guy for me. He was the artist that I first like took notice to and followed him. Followed everything he did from like New Mutants. Followed him over to the start of Image and Youngblood, and I, reading the Extreme books from Image, they would always have like letter pages in the back and pictures from the Extreme offices. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. I would love to work there one day. And then by the time I got into comics, like trying to break into the industry real late. At least in my opinion, I was in my, I guess my early 30s when I finally made a serious attempt at it. And at that time, Rob was kind of out of the industry. But I found on Mark Miller's website, there was a message board, and there was the Rob Liefeld appreciation thread. So I checked it out, and it was just fans just talking about Rob Liefeld. I was like, oh, I found my people. So I started chiming into there, and Rob heard about it, and he came onto the message board and started talking to us. But comic fans being the way they are, when people realized Rob was in the thread, a lot of people started like giving him a hard time and whatever. And Rob just had enough of it, and he told all the ones that were like cool to him that he was like, hey, I'm going to start my own message board. You guys are all welcome to come over, and we can talk about whatever you want. So I followed him over there, and it was around the time Coney Waves was coming out. So I started posting, worked from the book, and he took notice to it and really liked it. And just one day I sent him a message and just told him how much like his work inspired me when I was younger, and I'd love to work with him one day. And he responded back, and he was like, we are going to work together one day. And I was like, oh, wow. And we started a relationship from that. And it was like on a Thanksgiving day, maybe 2006. I forget. But I got a phone call, and I didn't recognize the number. Usually I don't answer if I don't recognize the number, but I answered it. Said hello, and on the other end I hear, Poulton, it's Liefeld. What's up? And he talked my ear off for about a good 2 hours, just talking comics, talking how much he was impressed with everything I was doing, and that he had an idea to bring Evangeline back. And based on my work on Coney Waves, he thought I was the writer to bring her back. He wasn't ready at the time to start a new series, but in the meantime, he was going to give me a license to use her in one issue of Coney Waves. So we did the Evangeline versus Coney Waves one shot, which ended up being like the highest selling Coney Waves book. And so I did that, and we kept in touch from that point on. I would just always persistent, but respectful about Evangeline. Like, when can we get the wheels rolling on it? And it just sort of took off from there.
Well, Sharon, when you get something like that, when somebody kind of puts that at your feet, you don't really want to not pursue it, but you don't want to be overbearing about it either, right?
Yeah. Early on, I think Rob nicknamed me the squeaky wheel, because I would always like remind him that about Evangeline and when it was going to happen, and he was like, "It's going to happen. Just relax." So from then, I just sort of calmed down, and whenever he needed me for something, I was there, and I knew eventually when the time was right, the Evangeline series was going to happen.
That's a pretty cool experience, and the way that he called you was totally the way that I would expect a Rob Liefeld phone call to go. Like, just like, "Hey, what's up, Poulton? This is Rob. This is Liefeld." You know what I mean? Like, that's exactly almost like in a Batman voice.
Yeah.
Like, "This is Liefeld." Yeah. So he's not he's definitely known for having a very fiery disposition. within the comics industry. I think you could probably agree that's probably a fair assumption, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. He's a character. I love him. I think I don't know if I told him. Maybe I told my wife that I love like the feisty Rob.
I feel like it has to be interesting at least.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love the brash Rob Liefeld that was wearing 501 jeans, making commercials with Spike Lee. He was the first comic book rock star, I think, and he'll always be that rock star to me. So I love when he's on Twitter, like getting into it with people.
Well, the interesting thing, I guess for some history first, for those of you who are not familiar with Rob Liefeld, if you read comic books, I don't know what you're doing with your life if you're not familiar with Rob Liefeld, but he was kind of part of that whole Marvel superstar artist movement that led to the creation of Image Comics, Rob is he's really known, I think, for he sometimes like he just goes really grandiose with things. Like instead of a 6-pack, he does like a 28-pack. You know what I'm saying? And like all of his guys, like his creations are all just decked out to the max. Like for instance, he did Slade Wilson, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so he loves like the pouches and the abs that go on for days, and yeah, so that's kind of Rob Liefeld's. That's kind of some just sort of little Rob Liefeld isms, if you will. So if you see that in art, that's kind of something that a lot of people kind of copied from him afterwards. So yeah. So you said you mentioned so you had met Rob, and he worked with you on the Evangeline series, and that led to you going to DC Comics as part of the New 52, right?
Yeah. I still remember the day I was at my day job, and I took a break and just to check my cell phone, and I saw I had an email from Rob, and he was like, "Hey, doing a bunch of books at DC, thinking about bringing you with me. Would you be interested in scripting Hawkman for me?" And I was like, "Yes, definitely. When do we get started?" And I didn't hear back for like 2 weeks, and it was killing me.
Oh, sure.
And then he responded back and was like, "DC's going to give you a call and get you on the books, and we're going to get rocking from that point on." So yeah, DC called me up. The editor who called me up used to work at Wizard, and he said he was a big fan of Coney Waves. So I was like, "Oh, that's awesome."
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, so I got to do Hawkman. We didn't start the book. We took over for the first creative team. So we started at issue 9, but the first creative team didn't do a origin for Hawkman. So we were lucky, and we got to do Hawkman's origin for the New 52.
Oh, very cool. Now from going from doing things at the smaller publishers and moving on to Image, like to kind of step back a little bit, what were the main differences you noticed between how places like Arcana did things versus places like Image?
Well, the differences between Arcana and Image, Image just had a bigger staff and production team, and they had, like, at Arcana it was pretty much me and Sean. Image had people in defined roles that handled marketing, that handled production. They had several production people, which was great. And then the difference between Image and DC was you didn't have to do the project management that comes along with indie comics. They have an editor that works with the whole creative team. They'll get Rob's plot, send it to me, they'll send it to the artist. when the pages start coming in, they send the pages to me to write a script. They'll send my script to the letterer, stuff like that. So when you're doing indie comics, it usually seems like it falls on the writer to be the project manager, and he's the one making sure everything gets done. Where at DC, you're just a cog in the wheel, in the big picture of things. You're just one small part of the process.
So they did things then kind of what's traditionally referred to as the Marvel way, where where Rob would plot it out, the artist would draw it, and then you would go back and kind of write all the dialogue and the captions and all that.
Yeah, that's how I've always worked with Rob, Marvel method. I'm not sure. I don't know if the other teams, creative teams, were doing that on other books, but for us, Rob was plotting, sending the plots to the artist, and when the pages started coming back is when I wrote the dialogue and stuff.
How do you feel like, how is that different for you? Like, how did that change your creative process versus like when you started from scratch?
I prefer it. I feel like writing dialogue's the hardest part of writing, but not as hard once the art starts coming in, because the artist may interpret something I write differently, and it will spark an idea and let me go in a different direction than I had intended. Plus, it's just I feel like it's more inspiring creatively to see what you wrote come to life, and it makes it easier to put the words in those characters' mouths.
Sure. I know when I was writing the Dead Cell, when I did the initial first chapter, Scott Simmons, who did the art for that, he kind of gave me a hard time because he was like, you're not really giving me a whole lot of direction. You're just kind of like, whatever you think goes here. So from that point on, like, I was a lot more detailed with scripting. I think it probably a little too detailed at that point.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so how do you find, like, do artists usually prefer like more towards the Marvel method or more towards the more traditional method?
All the artists I've worked with seem to prefer the Marvel method. Occasionally, I might work with a newer artist who needs the direction, and they'll want me to, like, not only write everything out, but they want me to write out their scene for them, and provide almost provide like a thumbnail of what they should draw, because they're just not they're not comfortable yet figuring out the shot for themselves. I've been lucky though. I've worked with, like, when I started out on Coney Waves, I worked with Steve Basili, who was he was a storyboard artist before getting into comics. So he would want even less. he would sometimes be just write me a paragraph or two on what the story is, and I'll take care of the rest. So it was kind of a simple way for me to break in. But I felt like as we progressed and I became more comfortable in my writing, there were certain shots I definitely wanted in. So I started breaking it down into. I still wasn't writing the dialogue until the artwork came in, but I was still breaking the plot down page by page and panel by panel, because there were specific scenes I needed for my story.
Sure. Now I know I at one point in time, Mark was kind of not Mark. I'm sorry. Sean was kind of funneling me some projects.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, he did promise me that I was going to get to write a book for Shaquille O'Neal, and nothing ever happened with that, but I was super.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like when I don't remember if it was at San Diego, but I think it was at the Cincinnati Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
He like gave me this ridiculous list of stuff. He's like, I'm gonna put you on this Kiss book. I'm gonna have you write for Shaquille O'Neal. I'm gonna do this. Like, I'm gonna put you in with that Bender Spink, so you can write stuff that's gonna get turned into movies. And none of that happened, but he did give me this project. I guess it was called Psychonaut, I think. And I guess some it was written by a guy who only does like Portuguese, like he doesn't know English. So when he translated the book to English, like you couldn't even understand anything in the script. Like you could understand nothing, right? So he basically sent me all these finished art pages, which were really awesome. Like they were completely 100% done. I mean, I thought they were really cool looking anyway, and I just created a whole new story from what I saw on the pages, right? And I was actually pretty psyched on it. Did you ever read any of my read my whole books?
Yeah, I read the Dead Cell.
Yeah, so hopefully when you read it, you saw I pay like a lot of attention to like small details.
Yeah.
So I put like a whole lot of effort into like creating like this whole like mythology and like I changed all the characters. Like I could tell, like for instance, there was this one character that was a Minotaur. So I changed his name to like the actual name of the Minotaur, which I don't remember what it was now, but like I made this stuff like a lot more in line with like mythology and stuff like that, and like created like that whole aspect of it. And but yeah, nothing ever came of that book, which is a real bummer, because everybody that read it was like super psyched on it, so I was pretty bummed about that. But that's really my only experience with just kind of writing off the art.
Yeah, that's funny. I had like a similar thing happen with a project at Arcana. There was a book that came in called Leviathan, and it was written in Spanish. So it was up to me to like rewrite the book and make a story out of it. It was just like a collection of 3 short stories, but with the same characters. So I made one cohesive story out of it, and I finished it, and I was so happy with how it turned out. And then I think Sean got in an argument with the creator of the book, because the creator went behind his back and sold the South American rights to it or the digital rights, I can't remember. And Sean just dropped the book, and I was like, "Oh, that work."
Oh, no, I mean, I'm willing to bet you that I spent like probably 100 hours like rewriting that thing. So I was super bummed about it. But
yeah, I bet.
It is what it is, man. It's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
I'm surprised I never heard of the Shaquille O'Neal project. There was always like tons of things coming in, like when I was there, that never panned out. Like I think Akon at one point was going to do a book with us, or his manager pitched an idea to us. All sorts of things.
Well, then I know too. Like I guess there was a point in time when like he was like selling books to Asylum Pictures or something.
Yeah.
You're familiar with Asylum Pictures and all that?
Oh yeah. My son and I love the movies.
So I guess one of them was Dinosaurs versus Dragons, which I think that was an Arcana book maybe, and then they had sold it to them as a movie, and Sean wasn't happy with the scripts, and Asylum wasn't happy with the scripts, so he was gonna have me rewrite it. So I went down and like I put all this effort in to figure out, like, because basically Dinosaurs versus Dragons is like dinosaurs versus a fire-breathing dinosaur.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's not really like it's not like Godzilla versus Mothra. You know what I'm saying? So I tried to like I wrote out this whole like this whole thing about how like the dragons were going to be created through like genetic experiments on like lizards, and there's this beetle that shoots a poisonous gas that like burns your skin and stuff like that. So in order to stabilize like the dinosaur DNA and stuff, and like in order to create a dinosaur with this lizard, they tried to like stabilize the DNA, and then so this dinosaur was like spitting this fire gas, and then it had like this like there are also lizards that have bones inside their throat, and they click the bones together to make sound. So that's what was going to create the spark and turn it into a dragon, and it would catch that gas on fire basically. But yeah, I was pretty psyched on it too, because I was like, no offense to whoever wrote it, like I don't remember who wrote it, but no offense to it, but it was kind of a stupid idea to begin with. So again, I know that there's no way, like anytime you say no offense before something, it's automatically like you're setting yourself up for an offensive
Yeah.
comment. So I'm really sorry if this guy hears it and it hurt his feelings. 'Cause that's not my intention, but maybe the dead cell was a stupid idea. I don't know. Yeah.
That's awesome, though. I love hearing. These are all Arcana stories I never knew about. It's amazing everything that happened after I left. I'm sort of in the fold now, so it's nice to catch up on the missing years.
Oh yeah, I felt like there was in my experiences with Arcana, it was kind of like a when you were there, like everything was very straightforward and like it was very direct. There was no like weird random sidebars, but as I started dealing more with Sean, like I said, Sean is just all over the place with stuff. And again, I mean, I totally mean that as a term of endearment. But yeah, he's always doing something wacky, man. He just and God bless him, man, because somebody has to go out there and just do the crazy stuff. So somebody's got to shoot for the stars. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, getting back to comics with you. So you're working for Image. You're moving over to DC now. What was it like going from like creator-owned projects into the machine that is DC Comics?
For me, it was awesome. It was I felt like maybe a little bit of validation for all the hard work I had put in. Arcana is sort of a smaller press company, so it was nice that like that work paid off to lead to the next step. That was Image, that led to DC. It was nice to start making money from doing something I loved, and just work on an iconic character. Because like when your wife's friends or family ask you what you're writing and you tell them, like Coney Waves or even Evangeline, they have no clue what you're talking about. But then when you say Hawkman, they're like, oh, Super Friends or Justice League Unlimited, and you're like, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of makes people take you a little more serious when you tell them you write comic books, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
So
and
now let me ask you this too. Getting like, so when you were doing that, was like Rob kind of in the editor role as well, or did you have interactions with the DC editors?
We had interactions with the DC editors, but you could tell Rob definitely called the shots there. I think he fired. We had over a 6-month time frame. We had 3 different editors because Rob would fire them.
Oh wow! So he was definitely kind of wearing the pants in that situation, huh?
Yeah. Rob lets you know that he's the alpha in the equation. So like if he didn't like something, he would let the higher ups at DC know, and we would have a new editor. So it was always a revolving cast. Personally, I thought everyone was cool. I got along with everyone, but Rob's very particular about things the way he wants things done. So,
well, now when you were writing Hawkman, was there ever any talk of kind of branching off and doing any other projects with DC?
No, I always thought, because things were going so well early on, that I was hoping that we would eventually get to that point where maybe I could either take over Hawkman or I could go work on another project. I know Rob. I think Rob was having talks with them about him doing more projects too, because early on they were really happy with him, and he was happy being there. But it never came to fruition. We did talk about doing a huge Hawkman crossover, which would involve like pretty much like all the Alien titles. Like Superman would be involved because he was an alien. Red Hood and the Outlaws was going to be part of it because Starfire was in that book. One of the Green Lantern books was going to be involved. Grifter. It was going to be this big Hawkman event. They really wanted to pump up his presence because they were introducing the Justice League of America book, which he was going to be a part of. And I think maybe that's when things Rob started having a falling out with DC, because that got scrapped, and it was just it was going to be the Hawkman Wanted storyline, and that eventually just took place within the pages of Hawkman, and I think Green Arrow was the only crossover book.
So when you're doing these and you're planning these crossovers and you're planning out these ideas that you want to get into, like, were you ever told no, that you couldn't use any characters?
I was never in those discussions. Rob would always meet with I'm not sure who he was meeting with. I think at one point he was meeting with Jeff Johns, maybe DiDio. I'm not sure. But I think at one point everything was like he was given the green light and he would write it, and then at the last minute he would be told, well, I know for a fact because he told me on Deathstroke, he was told he could use, I forget the name of the character, but he could use like an old Titans character. So he wrote the character in, and then when the pages came in and it was ready to go to press, he was told that he needed to change that character's name because he wasn't allowed to use that character anymore. So last minute changes had to be made. I can't remember the name. I know she's married to, not in the New 52, but prior to that, she was married to Arsenal Red Arrow, Roy Harper. I can't think of her name though. I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, me too. So I guess that's kind of the maybe not so much for you then, but that's probably pretty frustrating as a creator when you're trying to build this story, and 1 minute they're like yeah, and the next minute they're like no.
Yeah, I think for Rob's part, he was I think he was just getting a little tired of the fights. None of this was to my knowledge until after the fact. At the time, I thought everything was cool, and then one day you're coming home from work and you get a notification on your phone, and you read a message you're tagged in, and it says, "I sure hope Mark Poulton still has a job." And I'm like, "What? What's going on?" And then I read up and I see that Rob had quit DC.
Well, and for anybody who follows the comic industry, that was kind of a huge deal when it happened, because again, Rob is not known for his gentle soul when it comes to frustration and such.
Yeah.
So at that point, kind of getting into that, there was this huge breakdown between Rob and DC Comics. Where did that leave you in the mix?
In limbo for probably like a week. I didn't know what was going on. My editor was like, we don't know who's writing the book, and I was like, oh, if you already have Rob's plots and you're happy with my scripts, I don't see why we just can't keep going the way we are. And they were like, "Oh, we're not sure if we're going to use Rob's scripts plots now because there was such bad blood." And then I got told that I was coming back to the book and I was going to script it. And I was like, "Oh, awesome!" Because I was looking forward to doing the next arc, and I turned in that script. Like, as soon as I found out I was back on, I turned in the script the next day because I was like, who knows how long this is going to last. I want to get that, make sure I get that last paycheck. And then I think there was just things with Rob had heated up again on Twitter with DC, and I think there was just too much bad blood that they couldn't fire Rob, so they had to do something. So they got rid of me, but they still used Rob's plots.
Oh, that's a bummer. So they
Yeah.
that kind of sucks, man. So you'd already done the work per se.
Yeah.
And then they were
I liken it to JTG from WWE. He was part of the Crime Time. Like he wrote a book about having heat with everyone in WWE, and it was for nothing he did, but it was for his tag team partner. And I was like, yeah, you have this heat and you don't do anything wrong. You just you got to take the blame for stuff you didn't do. It's just the nature of the business.
Sure, it's kind of like Triple H and the Click. They couldn't get anybody else, so they hit Triple H.
Yeah, definitely.
For the legendary curtain call.
Curtain call, yeah.
Yeah. So now from there, where did you go after DC? What happened?
Well, the editors there were real cool with me. They tried to hook me up with some stuff. There was talk of me doing some like digital shorts there, but it just never worked out. So I just went back to doing my own thing. I went back to my children's book, A Cat Named Haiku. We had done the first volume came out in 2010 and was well received, and I had wanted to do more. So we released a second volume, and I've been working on that a lot nonstop. And then I have other projects that I had wanted to do. I started trying to line them up. That was like my one biggest regret of like having books out at the same time from Image and DC. I always wanted to have that next book ready, so when things those two books, Evangeline and Hawkman, weren't going, I had that next thing lined up. And just for whatever reason, having the day job and being a parent and spending all my free time reading those two books, I never had time to fully invest in a new creator-owned project to have ready for when those books stopped. So it took me probably a good couple years to get things back rolling again.
Well, now speaking of A Cat Named Haiku, I know that's kind of a that's kind of like your baby, so to speak. That's like your labor of love, as we talked about before we went on air. I know you got a hardcover coming out in June, right?
July, actually, yeah.
July, okay. What's going on with that?
It's a collection of the first 3 volumes. Plus, we added a new story called Cthulhu Loves Kittens. Just as a joke, when I was going around promoting the last volume, it was around Halloween, so I wanted a Halloween-themed haiku print to sell. So I drew haiku being cuddled by Cthulhu, and the response to it was so great. I was like, oh, I really need to come up with something for this. So I came up with the title Cthulhu Loves Kittens and wrote up a little short story, and we added that to the collection, so there would be something new for the completists out there. But yeah, that's really been my baby since first came out 2010. It debuted at San Diego Comic-Con, and my wife and I were out there, and my son was 2 months old at the time, and he came out there with us, and I still remember doing a haiku signing with him asleep on my shoulder. I was holding him with one arm, signing haiku books with the other. I think I got pretty good at doing little haiku sketches.
One-handed?
With one-handed, yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. Again, every review that I've seen, everything that I've seen about A Cat Named Haiku, it seems like it's one of those books that's just universally loved, really, and that must feel awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely great. Like I told you earlier, it's getting to the point now, like when I do conventions and stuff, I have parents coming up telling me it's their child's favorite book. I have school teachers coming up telling me they use the book in their classroom to teach poetry and haiku. What's crazy is I guess last month I did a convention and I had this Harley Quinn come up and tell me that she uses haiku in the classroom, and I couldn't believe that this Harley Quinn was a teacher. It just blew my mind. So it's been really cool, and we've gotten into like merchandise and stuff with hats and shirts. We just placed an order for plushies. Everything seems to be going really well with it, and we've started having real early discussions about it, a possible animated series. So yeah, I couldn't be happier with it.
Oh, awesome, man! I hope. I really, I wish nothing but the best for you on that front. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, my interaction with you, you've always been a great guy. I've never heard anybody say anything negative about you, and that's rare in life in general.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I try to treat everyone cool. I know, you never know who you're going to interact with, and you don't want anyone to. You never know. You might be going to someone looking for a job, and it may have been someone that you don't want them to be someone that you had ticked off in a previous interaction.
Sure, no sense in burning bridges, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a weird story. Speaking about, we were talking about DC earlier, and you never know who you're going to talk to. I actually had a chance meeting with Dan Didio.
Uh-huh.
And then I met him again. Kind of ran into him the second time I went to San Diego Comic-Con as well, and I really thought for a minute that I was going to get a pitch meeting.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure that everybody who talks to him thinks they're going to get a pitch meeting. That's probably the easiest way to get people to quit talking to you. If you're in charge of DC Comics, right? So, but I literally went home and I wrote this huge, gigantic pitch for Prometheus.
Uh-huh.
And it's ridiculous, man. It has I picked all like D level characters because I was like, all right, I'm gonna pick all these people that nobody cares about. So hopefully when they read my pitch, they're like, screw it. What do we got to lose? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the New 52 kind of like killed my whole pitch. But I mean, not necessarily that I got it anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
But then I even tried to rewrite it to since Prometheus was in the Phantom Zone when the New 52 took place, he still exists in the pre 52 New 52 world.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, I'm not giving up on this pitch if it's the last thing I do. But then I gave up on it and I just kind of let it go.
Yeah, I had when they were when I was kind of in limbo with Hawkman, I wrote a Hawkman pitch for what would be the following story arc after the Rob plots ran out, and I just was incorporating all these Wildstorm characters because I knew they were making a point trying to work Wildstorm into the DC universe. So I was doing everything I could to try to be that company guy, but
Sure.
It just never went anywheres, and I always had, you never know, Rob has such, I wouldn't say a track record, but he's known to have, that fiery personality where things might not work out. So I always planted these Easter eggs in our Hawkman, scripts that I would have stuff to play off. So, it was funny whenever a reviewer would pick up on one of those Easter eggs because they thought something big was going on. I would hint that we used the character Pike, who was kind of like our Deadpool. He was a Wildstorm character. He was basically Jim Lee's version of Deadpool. And I had him talking about the universe, but talking about the old universe. And my theory was that he was caught in the bleed, which was the term Grant Morrison came up for the outskirts of the universe between the different 52 planets. So when the New 52 was created, he was in the bleed. So he retained all his memories from the old universe. But we never got to play on that, although like a couple of reviewers picked it up. And I was like, oh, that's so awesome that they picked up on it.
Yeah, and my kind of thing with, I mean, I guess I might as well spill the pitch anyway. But my whole thing was, you remember how Green Arrow killed Prometheus by shooting him in the head with an arrow?
Mm-hmm.
So my whole thing was that he didn't actually kill him; he just like paralyzed him, but he could still move like one arm. So he like drug himself with one arm. You remember how you could go into the Phantom Zone?
Yeah.
Whatever it was called, the Ghost Zone, maybe something like that. So he like crawled into it and went all the way into his little house, and he like fashioned this whole exoskeleton where he like literally like drilled through his own bones and like created this like exoskeleton that like worked with his brain. Like that's how deep his level of hatred for like the heroes had become, that he was willing to drill through his own bones to create this exoskeleton, right? So then when he comes out of the Ghost Zone or whatever it was called, he still remembers everything, and nobody else remembers him or what he, you know, what he meant to them prior to that, but he still remembers. And like, so he just was like, before, like Prometheus always came off as this guy who was just kind of like a cocky dick, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So instead he had become like this vessel of like his own hatred and like his own need to like be smarter and better and all that. And I was going to use like, well, I mean, again, there was no pitch, but I wanted to use like Neo the Unknown and that one guy that like in the Green Lantern, Green Arrow books, he from like Denny O'Neil's run, he basically like was a liar. And he like manipulated through like makeup and all this crap. He manipulated all these people into like race riots and stuff. So there was going to be like just all these characters that nobody cared about or nobody had used in like 20 years. So I felt like it was a safe thing. If you were going to pitch, I feel like it was a safe way to pitch because there's not really anything to lose by doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no one's. You think no one's else is going to be pitching these characters, so yeah, you're definitely unique for that, and it's safe because they're not tied up in other storylines or anything.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this. I know we're kind of starting to get close to our time, but you mentioned something about a project with Dee Snider's son Jesse. What's up with that?
When I was doing Evangeline, that was one of the things one of the projects I wanted to have ready to go when Evangeline eventually ended, and I had this idea for a comic about Odin and his two sons Thor and Loki as the world's greatest heavy metal band, and I was like, I was familiar with Jesse from he had done some books at DC. He did a miniseries called Dead Romeo. I was familiar with him from MTV had a show Rock the Cradle where it was like famous singers kids competing in a singing tournament, and he was also part of the reality show Growing Up Twisted. So I knew he was in the comics, so I reached out to him. He had no idea who I was, and I was like, hey, it was through Facebook. I was like, hey, you don't know who I am, but I write a book for Image. I have this really cool idea for a comic book series that I think you would be perfect to write with me. The reason being, he's the son of a famous singer, and he's also a singer himself. So he said, sounds cool. Are you going to be at New York Comic Con? And I was like, yeah, I'll be there. I'm doing a signing at the Image booth, and I gave him the time. And he goes, cool, I'll meet you there. So he showed up, and I pitched him I never actually got the chance to pitch him the idea because his wife was pregnant at the time, and he got a call from his wife that he needed to get home. So he left, and he just gave me his number and said, give me a call. So I gave him a call. I gave him the pitch, and he loved it, and he was on board. and we've been working on this for years. It's just been a long, process. Writing it out, we write together. He lives in California, but we get on Skype maybe once a week, and we spend a couple hours writing together. We have an artist on board. We have about 2 issues done. And the cool thing is, Jesse wrote a song to go along with the comic book. Wrote a song for Odin and the Gods of Rock to sing called the Gods of basically just called the Gods of Rock, and it's based on the or actually it's called Fight to the Death, and Jesse wrote the song and his dad recorded it with Jesse. So when the comic comes out, we're going to release it as a single. So it's awesome. I'm a huge 80s metal fan. I love Twisted Sister. So the fact that, I have Dee Snider singing a song for my comic book is so awesome.
Oh, absolutely, man. Actually, Dee Snider ruined a large portion of my childhood and my ability to sleep at night with Strangeland. Did you ever watch Strangeland?
Oh, that movie's awesome.
Captain Howdy legitimately freaked me out, man. Like all the piercing stuff, blew my mind.
Yeah, I actually heard they're making a sequel to it, so that's awesome.
Oh yeah, I love that soundtrack too. It's like the ultimate tribute to like nu metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you wanted to know what nu metal was all about, like you should buy that soundtrack and just rock it. Like, and to this day, like even though I try to pretend like I'm all like smart artsy and stuff, I still rock Captain Howdy. There's I forget the girl band that sang it, but it was a girl band that sang Captain Howdy on that album. And I friggin' loved it. Snot was on there. There were all kinds of great late 90s, early 2000s nu metal rap rock bands and stuff on it. It was ridiculous. So, before we get out of here, man, I know we didn't really talk much about wrestling. So maybe we'll get you on here in the future and we'll kind of talk more about wrestling, because I know you're a big wrestling fan. But where can people find you on the internet if they're looking for more information on what you got coming up?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Coney Waves. That's KONIWAVES. I'm on Facebook just under my name, Mark Poulton, and I also have a writing page called Mark Poulton Writing at Facebook. There's a Cat Named Haiku page on Facebook, and that's pretty much it. I'm always down to talk wrestling or comics or whatever with people.
Awesome. And again, if you're not familiar with Mark's work, stop into your local comic shop. I'm sure that they probably have back issues of Evangeline and Hawkman right there, like that you can just grab out of the bin still. But if not, you can get a lot of his stuff through Diamond, and most comic shops order from Diamond. So don't hesitate to get in there. Ask to get into his work, check it out, and support the guys who are out there creating for your pleasure. So thanks again, Mark. Appreciate it. And this has been Prophet FM.